Well, I have a great honor today to introduce our next guest. And my name is Jeff Smith. I live here in the Seattle area. My mother's from the Makah tribe, and my father's a non-Indian from Oregon. And so I now work for the Nakanni Native Program as the director. And I've been on the advisory board for Beyond the Frame and helped to get that started a couple years ago. And so I'm really honored to be here today with you all. So John and Coleen Graybill, they're going to share with us about their exciting project. I looked at their website. There's beautiful photographs there, and I think he'll probably share some of those. And I was asking him just a minute ago about how he got into photography, and he told me that when he was about in 5th grade, he was kind of looking through some old boxes and storage, and he found his father's Brownie camera. And from there, he started to develop his love of photography. He got into a group at a young age that learned how to develop the film and do all that fun stuff that we used to have to do in the old days. In their project, he's doing along with his wife, Coleen, when they are going back and they're finding descendants of Edward S. Curtis subjects of photographs. So some of the natives that were photographed all those years ago, he's finding them and he's going to tell the story. And I happen to be one of those descendants, so I didn't tell him yet, but so my great-grandfather was photographed by his great-grandfather, my great-grandfather Wilson Parker. So he's in the photo wearing a bearskin and holding a harpoon and with a sealskin float. So, and I think that he was telling me that he wants his photos to be able to tell a story, to have some art, to be an artistic way of telling a story, and I think you're going to learn a lot more interesting things. So thank you. May I introduce John and Coleen Graybill.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jeff. Want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Coleen?
You're going first.
I'm going first. Okay. Well, thank you, Jeff, for the introduction. I want to add to that. I am not a scholar. I'm not a historian. I'm not a politician. I am a photographer and an artist. That is the perspective for today's discussion here. Oh, yes, and another descendant that's in our audience today is my sister Janet, and she's up here. Yeah, give a little high sign, Janet. Thank you.
Know more about you?
No.
I'm Coleen, John's other half. I have been a portrait photographer for 29 years professionally. I have my master's degree and am a certified professional photographer through the Professional Photographers Association. Much the same as Edward Curtis belonged to and won his awards through. It's the same association, a little different name that's changed over time, but we are both a part of that association. And John's working on his master's. He's really close. What that entails is a whole lot of education and a whole lot of prints that have to score at a certain high level, at the national level. So it's not real easily attainable, and it does take some time. So, but he's, in a short amount of time, almost there, so I'm proud of him. So that's, yeah, we're both artists, photographers, and live in a little bitty town in Colorado called Buena Vista, less than 3,000 people, and we live at 9,000 feet, and we had many inches of snow when we left the other day. So go ahead, hon.
All right. My great-grandfather, And as many of you know, and what we've learned today, he did an epic project called the North American Indian. And this body of work that he produced was 20 volumes and thousands of photographs, possibly exposing over 40,000 plates on this project. And he exposed another 30,000 plates just on Mount Rainier and the surrounding area. This is another picture of what the volumes look like. It's said that there's 2,200 images inside these books, plus the accompanying portfolios, around 4,000 pages of text, and these are individually printed. And I know the question came up earlier, just as you see the picture up here, these are handmade photogravures that were inserted into each set. And photogravure is a process of making a print onto a copper plate, then inking the copper plate, running it through a press, and out comes a print by hand, each one.
So to start over, they had to clean the plate, re-ink it, and redo it. So 2,200 images times approximately 272 sets that were sold. That's a lot of handmade prints. So the books were really, really special.
He also, as we learned, used the Edison phonographic recorder, recording some 10,000 wax cylinders that are available today to listen to, at least some of them. University of Indiana in Bloomington has an archive of these and is working to digitize them and preserve them. So just to set the record straight, I get to ask this all the time. I said, okay, now what's the connection between you and Curtis? Well, Edward Curtis had 4 children. Harold, or Uncle Hal, Elizabeth, known as Aunt Beth, Florence, my grandmother, and then Catherine, also known as Aunt Billy. Florence was the only child of Curtis's that had any children of her own, and she had 2 boys, Edward Curtis Graybill, also known as Ted, and then my dad, James Henry Graybill, also known as Jim. Ted did die in World War II over in France, leaving just my father as a direct descendant of Curtis. My dad had 3 children, Anne, Janet, and myself.
Did you notice a trend where nobody gets called what their real name was? It took me a long time to figure out the family tree when I joined the family.
It's been confusing to me. Who was that, Billy? In this picture here, this is a family picture that Manfred Magnuson, my Uncle Mag, or Beth's husband, took.
Again, not his name.
On the left is Florence, my grandmother. Next to her, her dad, Edward. And then Aunt Billy next to him, Uncle Hal, and then Aunt Beth. And this, I believe, was his 80th birthday, so about 1948. I want to tell a few stories about the relationships that my great-grandfather had with people in his lives, whether it was Native Americans or dignitaries. And this particular picture is inaugural parade, March of 1905 for Teddy Roosevelt. And Native Americans had gone to be in the parade and also to talk to Teddy, and Edward was there with them. My grandmother tells this story from this day. It's this light drizzle, a little bit of rain coming down. Native Americans are walking in front of Edward, and he's hurrying. He's got his equipment, and it's kind of cold and damp out. And he spots a Native American in front of him, and this Native is wearing a bright red blanket, wrapped up in this red blanket from neck to toe. And the Native turns and sees Edward, and as he turns and sees Edward, he opens up this blanket and wraps Edward up in the blanket to shield him from the rain. And that Native was Geronimo. You gonna say something about Geronimo?
Geronimo, as you all are aware, was a very fierce warrior. Eluded not only the U.S. Army, but the Mexican Army for a long, long time. I think it's pretty safe to say he didn't have a lot of respect for the white man, and I don't necessarily blame him. but there was somehow this connection between them. We're not sure how they knew each other or if they knew each other before this date, but there was certainly some sort of connection that day, and it just kind of shows how Edward was accepted by the Native Americans.
He was also accepted by Teddy Roosevelt, the president at the time. They had a close relationship. They often conferred back and forth to each other about content of the North American Indian Project and various topics that came up, and one in particular was the Battle at Little Bighorn. They had quite a discussion about that. But the interesting point about this is Teddy learned of Edward's expertise as a photographer through the child portrait photography contest from the Ladies' Home Journal. There was a painter, Walter Russell, that was to paint the top 10 pictures. Walter was so impressed with Edward's work that he told the president about it. And the president, soon after that, invites Edward out to Sagamore Hills to photograph his children. And it was a 4-day episode. I think we saw this earlier. This is Quentin and the Daisies. This is probably one of my favorite pictures that Edward took on that episode. And this is an amazing trust. The President of the United States is inviting this photographer into his home to photograph his children. The outcome of this picture, Teddy again was so impressed. He says, "Edward, my daughter is getting married. Alice is getting married. Would you photograph the wedding?" I don't know if I would do that, but Edward does. And this is Alice Roosevelt and her husband the day of their wedding. Again, very, very trusting relationship between the two to be able to do this. A Native American that was dear to my great-grandfather was Chief Joseph. And through events that happened after Chief Joseph had died, my great-grandfather actually buried him twice. And second time, the Washington Historical Society had made a monument to honor Chief Joseph in Nespeelum, Washington. And my great-grandfather was there and helped in the digging of the new gravesite. And my great-grandfather is quoted as saying that Chief Joseph was perhaps the greatest man that he ever knew. Another dear and trusted friend was Alexander Upshaw. Alexander Upshaw, if those of you are familiar with this story, was a product of the Carlisle School for Indians. And he tried his hardest to be what was expected of him. And often he would be wearing blue jeans and a button-down shirt. But he was a trusted friend of Curtis. Alexander Upshaw was an interpreter in the field for my great-grandfather. He's single-handedly got Curtis into more tribes than probably any other interpreter he worked with and paved the way for much of the early work that was done. He also did field research, and his notes and stuff were put into words, and they're in the volumes. And when Curtis said, "Hey, I want to take your picture," it wasn't "come dressed like this," it was "come dressed as you want to be remembered." And this is how Alexander Upshaw chose to be dressed and photographed. A dear, trusted friend.
Two of the women that were a part of Curtis's work and life were employed at the studio. Imogene Cunningham and Ella McBride. Both women ended up being very famous photographers in their own right after leaving the Curtis studio. Imogen did platinum printing for him for 2 years, and Ella McBride actually ran his studio for 8 years, lived in his home, helped raise his children when he was out of town. And he and Ella actually met mountain climbing Mount Rainier, and she was one of the guides on some important trips. We have so many stories we could share, but there's just not time. So I'm skipping over things and hesitating. But one of the things that we want to wrap all these people into is Curtis's acceptance of people for who they were. in their soul, not the color of their skin, not their gender, not their social status. He obviously was great friends with the president, as you're about to hear, and as most of you already know about Princess Angeline. She was basically, a native living on the streets, and he ran the whole gamut in who his friends were and who he accepted.
So that brings us to our Descendants Project. What is the Descendants Project? Well, I, as a descendant of Edward Curtis, have set forth on a project to find descendants of his work. And through the descendants that I find, I am doing interviews and photographic work, much like he did, in an effort to present their story in their words to the world. And so far we've had a really phenomenal response. Our project is really early on in its stages. We just started this about halfway through the year, so it's early on. But we hope to produce a book. We hope to produce photogravure prints, much like my great-grandfather did. We've already got an offering for showing in the Muskegon Museum of Art up in Michigan, and possibility of some European and Chinese museums as well.
Gallery in Aspen that deals in Curtis' work has asked that we show it there. The Rainier Club has certainly shown interest. So we've photographed one descendant, and we already have all these offers. So the story is just there, and we think it's going to be incredible to share all these stories. So, and the other thing that's going to be a part of that is if any of you went to the SAM for their latest exhibit, you saw Will Wilson's, where you held up your camera phone and it would trigger a video that would play then. Ken was a part of that and had him playing his drum and singing, and that was wonderful. We are planning much the same. Ironically, I've been wanting to do this process for years, and it was really refreshing to see Will putting it into place. But basically, you'll point your phone at the image, and a video will play. We want that video to be our descendant telling the world what they want to share about being a Native American in today's world. As all of you know, it's very different now than it was 100 years ago. And what's that connection and what's that message that they want to share? So we want them personally, their voice, their face, sharing that, along with the photographs and the interviews that we do.
It's an interesting thing that we as photographers go through. I started out in film. I was using large format. Digital came around. I was all excited about digital photography. And through digital photography, it was always the demand, less digital noise or finer grain, sharper, higher resolution. And you know what? We're kind of there. We're there to the point now where for our project, I feel digital captures too much. And it's too much detail, it's too sharp, it's not how I want my images to look. So I'm going back to early film days, and actually we're going back to glass plate or dry plate. And I'm going to be shooting using this camera and setup. This is a 6.5 by 8.5 inch view camera. And the glass plates that we shoot on, for those in the audience that are used to photography, it has a speed of ASA 2 or ISO 2, which is really slow. Given today's standards.
Clay talked about this morning, a 10, 12-second exposure is pretty normal.
Very common.
So it's a challenge.
The other product that we come across, if we look at images in the period of my great-grandfather, they're described as romantic, soft focus, artistic, and yes, my great-grandfather was very artistic. I'd say perhaps cutting edge and leading in that area. Not that I'm biased or anything, but it was also a product of the equipment available in the day. The lens that I have mounted on this camera is a Petzval design. And the Petzval lens, when it came out, revolutionized photography back in the day. It was a fast lens. It's a huge hunk of glass that allows a lot of light in. And we actually were able to get down to exposure times that made sense for portrait work. The effect of this lens is the very center is sharp, but everything around it's soft and out of focus. That was a product of the lens design. It's a product of the equipment available back in the day. As an example, I'm going to show a picture that I shot early on setting up this equipment and testing it.
So like 2 weeks ago.
And so I did this with the camera setup that you just saw on a glass plate negative in my portable portrait tent. And there's no other manipulation done to this image except the toning of the image. We process it in our own little makeshift darkroom, and this is what we come up with. And yes, after seeing Curtis's work on our walls growing up all my life, this is what I love, so there we are.
We both are pretty adept at Photoshop. And as hard as we tried through different lenses, different lens types, different focal lengths, different depths of field, I mean, with all the knowledge between the two of us, which he's very techie, I tend to be very artsy, so when we combine, we actually make sense. We tried all kinds of things to make our digital images look like this, and we just could not make it happen. We would dumb it down where we were taking out a lot of detail and adding soft focus, and it did not look the same. So as much as I kind of fought having to go to a view camera instead of shooting it digitally and making things easier for ourselves, no, we're doing it the old-fashioned way, and just as Curtis did. And John's thrilled about that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm back in the late 70s, early 80s with my original view camera doing this kind of stuff. It's fun. So as many of you know, the first Native American that my great-grandfather worked with is credited as being Princess Angeline. And he writes about that in his unpublished memoirs, that she was his first native that he worked with. And this is a common picture that we see of Princess Angeline from Curtis. The one on the left is the clam digger, which is also of Princess Angeline. And Princess Angeline really started his whole career. And being the first descendant, we had the privilege of meeting one of Princess Angeline's descendant, third generation great-granddaughter. And she's in our audience today, Mary Lou
So Mary
Slaughter.
Lou, would you stand up?
Woo! Mary Lou was so gracious in allowing us to work with her. Thank you, Mary Lou. And I've got a couple of video clips here and some pictures that we did of our early work with Mary Lou, and I'm going to share with you now.
Well, I had the privilege and the honor to meet John Graybill and his wife, Coleen. And he is the great-grandson of Edward Curtis. And I was really taken back by him. And I don't know what it is, but we just kind of met, and all of a sudden I feel like I've got an old friend. It was just strange, and you meet somebody new, and we just kind of clicked. And I've had the most fun 3 days that I can remember because of the filming crew here, and his wife and him. And I just really like them much. We kind of hit it off. His great-grandfather took the pictures of my great-great-grandmother. So it's kind of fun. We get together and we were talking about it, and then I wind up with a bunch of pictures. So it's it's been a fun journey.
So she got to be our guinea pig with our first interviews and our first photographs and
In our sweat lodge.
in our yeah. It was a little warm the day we set up our tent, and our photo tent is black. So inside a black tent on a hot day in full sun, she was a trooper, and yeah. So we want to share a little bit of her story, and as John said, there's a couple of our images that we made of her that day that are intertwined in here. So enjoy.
Back in, I would think I was 8 years old, and I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade. And when I came to school, one day the teacher came in the room and she says, "Oh," she said, "I just been to the Kitsap County Fair, and I saw Mary Lou and her grandmother's picture next to a big log from Ole Man House that was burned in Suquamish." And all the kids turned around and looking at me, and I'm going, oh, I felt like crawling under the desk, you know, because I was kind of a shy kid. And, and so I was real popular for about 5 minutes until the bell rang. And then when I went to go home, I had to walk like 3 blocks home to school, from school to my house. The kids chased me and spit at me and called me a dirty old Indian, because it wasn't popular back in the 40s to be 1940s to be Native American. And so I can remember going home, and the kids were nasty, and I ran in the house, and I was crying, and my mother said, "What is wrong with you?" And she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I'm not Indian like you, I'm Swedish like my daddy." And she said, "You didn't get them big brown eyes from your Swedish father." And I said, "I wish I had blue eyes like Daddy." She said, "Shut up, big lad, they're straight and you can see out of them." So I'm not getting any sympathy from my mother whatsoever. And so I decided to go in my bedroom, and I cried my eyes out. And I just decided I stuck my Native American in the back of my head, as far as I was concerned, forever. And I was going to be Swede like my dad. And so I have to laugh now when I look back, because it took me till I was 50 years old to get a hold of my heritage. And I knew who I was, don't get me wrong, but it was painful. And then my son, Michael Halliday, got into carving, and I had to validate his heritage, is what it was. And so I took my great-grandmother, Ina Mae Thompson's Indian name, which was Sladite, which means lady in Lushootseed. And things just changed for me when I did that. I got into weaving, and I started out with a Tsimshian lady for lessons, and I made this little basket that has a lid on it, and I brought it to her, and I asked her, I showed it to her, and she said, "I think you need to go to your own tribe." And I said, "Well, where do I go?" And she said, "Up at Suquamish, there's a guy named Eddie Carrier. He's a really good teacher." And we've been buddies and friends, and I studied with him he always teased me. He said, "I never thought I'd ever get rid of you." And because I almost had 3 years with him, because I just was like a sponge. I was just sucking up what he was telling me and how to do it. I had a gorgeous basket that I gave him. It was about this big around and about this high, and it was a hard coil, and it had mountain design on it. And he was sitting in a chair, and I said, "Eddie," I said, "remember when I was supposed to give that basket to you?" He said, "Oh yeah, I remember." And I said, "Here, you take this one, and this is to replace the one." And he got tears in his eyes, and he's looking at it. He's going, "Oh, Mary, you do such great work." And I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking, geez, I just made his day, He said, "Of all my weavers that I have, you have been my best student." And that meant the world to me.
I think she deserves a little round of applause again. So thank you again, Mary Lou, for being our first and carrying on that tradition.
So in our conversations with people, we keep meeting descendants, and it happens randomly. We haven't really had to seek out too much yet. For an example, we were volunteering with a local charitable group in our community, helping them run a photography contest and providing judging for it. And there was another pair of photographers that was there. And we get done with our meeting and we're chit-chatting about what each of us is doing. You know, photographers or artists in general always have to have a project they're working on. And so we were explaining ours, and the wife says, oh, well, we have a friend in Colorado Springs that's kind of into this stuff. And she gets out her phone and pulls up an image, and it's this image. And this is the image that my great-grandfather took in Alaska in 1927. And she goes on to say that she knows the granddaughter of the baby in this photo. And this baby is still alive at age 94. And so a conversation starts, you know, and there's details to work out and arrangements to be made.
But we're going to Florida in January to photograph her.
To photograph Anna, the baby that you see here.
Toddler, yeah, it's awesome. We're really excited about that.
And then meeting Jackie.
We can go on.
I have never seen this photo. I don't think any of our family has.
So this is Jackie, her granddaughter.
Wow.
There's one of
Here,
Ola,
look at this.
too.
A different one. Oh my gosh. What?
So you've not seen that one either?
No, never.
So what we had done when we met with Anna, the toddler in the photograph, when we met with her granddaughter, we took some notebooks that we have of unpublished images from Alaska with us to share with them, just for cultural reasons and to see their ancestry and the lifestyle at that period. And little did we realize that there were more individual images of her ancestors in these books. So it was a real treat for them and for us to watch them find these images and to react to them.
Recently, in the past month, we were in Canyon de Chelly, working down with the Navajos. And I was giving a talk to another group of photographers down there, and then we went into the canyon and did some photography. Coleen and I stayed a few days after that to talk with the natives in the area. And we were able, through talking and conversation, to find at least 2 descendants of the horse riders in this famous picture titled Canyon de Chelly. Now you're probably looking at this picture saying, what the heck happened to this thing? I've got a fun little story. My parents, recently, our family helped move them out of their home into assisted living. And so after we've gotten them out of the house, we have to go through and clean everything out and prepare the home. And I don't wish that on anybody. It's a painful process. But nonetheless, we had to do this. And so I'm up in a crawl space, up in a loft area, and it's kind of been rodent infested. There's holes chewed through the sheetrock and rags stuffed in the holes trying to block the access. And one of the last things I pull out of this crawl space is this picture of Canyon de Chelly. Obviously, the rodents found the lower left corner. And my first thought was, oh no, it's ruined this beautiful picture, and I was going to cut it out. And friends encouraged me, no, that's part of the story, leave that in. And so thus the picture here. The other fun thing about this, and I'm sorry it doesn't show up here, but in the lower right-hand corner, it's hand-signed by Edward, and it's Christmas 1948, Hal and Mary being Hal's wife, from Dad. And, so that's kind of dear to my heart.
And we found so many of these kind of things in the house. So we have quite the treasure trove now. So part of our project also is through profits that are made on the book and the prints and the shows and the things that we want to do to put this message out there, is we want to take a portion of those proceeds and give back to the Native American community. We're in the process of trying to figure out how that looks and where it's going. Our current thought is to encourage and reward cultural arts, so performance or visual arts or something along that line is kind of where we're thinking. And that will be run through a foundation that we're also in the process of trying to get started. It's going to kind of encompass the family collection and doing presentations on Curtis himself. But so those two will work hand in hand in giving back to the Native American communities. So that's a really important part of this project to us. And we want to take every opportunity we can to make sure the voice of this project is heard in every way possible.
Well, I give special thanks to a few people that this material wouldn't be possible without. There was a collodion wet plate photo of Mary Lou and myself that Daniel Carollo made. He's here in Seattle, does beautiful work. Some video, thanks to Von Raymond, Curtis and Graybill family collection, and then some images from the Library of Congress.
So lastly, we wanted to, share our website. It is currently still a lot of just our landscape work as we make the transition into having product with this project. That will get added more and more. So the mountainspiritphoto.com Descendants is our page just kind of giving the description of our project. And then if you go to our blog page, that will be where we keep everyone up to date with what we're doing. Where, if we're speaking somewhere or what descendant we're in contact with and talking to as we photograph, as we're doing our research. So all those kind of things will be listed on that blog. So there is a subscribe button. So go ahead and put your email in there, and then we will send out notices not more than once a week. Likely it will be every other-ish, maybe, before I get blogs posted. But
Maybe once a month.
Maybe once a month.
If we're lucky.
So that's where we'll keep everyone up to date on that. So if you're interested in following our travels, that would be a great place to do that. So we encourage you to do that.
I want to close out this before we open up to questions with just a couple of thoughts that I've had. When I look back at the body of work of my great-grandfather, and as I tried to illustrate in the first early slides, this idea of acceptance and openness, I don't believe he could have accomplished what he did had he not been open heart, open mind, and accepting of people, and people accepted him. And I believe through our work, we're showing the same thing in today's world of people that have a story to tell. We're trying to give them a vehicle in which to tell that story. And it's my belief that all of us, regardless of who we are, need to set aside our biases and our prejudices and seek knowledge and understanding of the people around us. And it's through that I think we can have a good, viable, solid community of openness and love. And with that, if anybody has any questions, we'll try to answer them the best we can. Thank you. Thank you.